And it's time for a Focus Africa. Now, as Donald John Trump returns to the White House tomorrow, so looming, Africa is watching closely. The first Trump administration left a mixed legacy on the continent with a focus on counterterrorism, trade, and competition with China. However, critics often described his Africa policy as neglectful, characterized by significant cuts to foreign aid and a transactional approach to diplomacy. As a second term urges closer to reality, many are asking, will it be more of the same, or will Africa see a shift in engagement under Trump 2.0? The indicators so far point a complex picture. Reports suggest that Trump's likely Africa policy will continue to prioritize strategic interests such as the fight against terrorism, while de-emphasizing development aid and multilateral cooperation. There's going to be trade relations that are expected to remain transactional, potentially jeopardizing programs like the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. Now, beyond economics and security, cultural flashpoints like the TikTok ban have, global implications, including in Africa, where digital platforms have become vital to youth empowerment and political expression. And so with Trump poised to become the first U.S. president with a criminal record, questions abound on how this unprecedented development might influence U.S. global credibility and its policies in Africa.
Yes, indeed. So to help us unpack these issues, we are joined by Joy John of the Bellcrest Institute in Washington, D.C. Joy John, I want to say thank you very much for joining us. I'm hoping that we have you now. Yes, indeed, we do. Thank you very much. Good morning to you.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Grand. Now, let's begin with the obvious matter at hand now, which is the TikTok ban. I hear some colleagues complaining that they can no longer access TikTok, but I'm like,
say my name.
You're in Africa. But
I just miss the Americans on TikTok. That's
yeah,
all.
we will miss them. But in any case, what are the potential ramifications of U.S. ban on TikTok for African new businesses and also digital innovation? As we've seen this in a rise in recent years, we're also focused on digital, but then to have America pull out of a platform that actually helps with businesses in Africa. What's your take on this?
Well, it's important to stress that, or to state for record purposes, that this ban was signed into law by President Joe Biden in April 2024, citing national security concerns by the Chinese ownership of the platform. Now, the shutdown has left over 170 million American users stranded. Like, I woke up at 11 p.m. Eastern time in Washington, D.C., and I could not log in. I got that default message that's been shown across social media. And it is worthy to note that we have a lot of African content creators who have a significant presence with a large following on TikTok. And this ban would really shatter their livelihood. It's going to disrupt small businesses. A lot of people sell off of TikTok. It's been a platform that people could gain knowledge from, build their following, and educate. So we have digital entrepreneurs as well who rely on the platform for their day-to-day income and visibility. So it's really going to, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's people are stranded. People who rely on the platform are stranded. But then,
we also hear that Trump has said that he's going to give, or perhaps maybe he's going to touch on this aspect, this as soon as he gets into the White House, and perhaps giving a 90-day buffer zone where deliberations and reconciliations can be made. How does this affect the situation currently?
Well, it's reassuring. He gets sworn in tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's kind of reassuring that he would look into the situation. But then again, this underscores that need for Africa to invest in its digital ecosystems. So right. we wait, fingers crossed.
But if you're saying that you wanted to make it clear that it was Joe Biden that signed the ban, but in 2020, the United States government announced that it was considering banning the Chinese the app, right? And this was upon a request from the then president, who viewed the app as a national security threat. So this has snowballed from his first administration. Do you see him switching sides?
Well, Trump is now on TikTok. He has one of the largest followings.
Is it because he
and
is it
the
is
last
it
election?
is it because he's now seeing the potentiality of it, or is it just he?
Possibly so, but then again, he had 34 points from the youth in the last election. So he obviously now sees the benefits or the positives of TikTok.
But in 2019, also during his administration, the United States Army and, of course, the Navy banned TikTok on government devices after the Department of Defense labeled it as a security threat, as a security risk. And that was also under his administration as well.
Yes. But then again, he's been out of office for 4 years and things happen. So the buck fell on President Joe Biden, who signed it into law. We do have a process here. A president can't wake up and put a ban or enforce a ban. It did go through Congress, and President Joe Biden had signed it into law.
And that part, and when you look at the voting for it to be signed or for it to go into the final reading before it was signed into law, who are the people that supported the ban on the Congress?
I don't have the numbers.
All right. Well,
those numbers are available if you would search for it.
All right. Well, we know that
it was
about
a majority.
Okay. Now, let's talk about African nations, right? He's going to be sworn in tomorrow. We expect a second Trump presidency in terms of security, trade, and political engagement. Those are the forefront for African nations. The first administration with Trump, it was the term is he was neglectful when it came to Africa, and he was only focused on transactional priorities. And one of the discussion that has been on the forefront is AGOA. What can African nations expect with a second Trump presidency?
So you're right in the sense that his first term was transactional. And in this second term, I do foresee a transactional relationship with African nations. But then again, the U.S. also benefits from AGOA. I know there have been speculations as to where we stand or where Africa will stand, but when you look at the fact that AGOA itself offers several benefits to the U.S., the most significant is the enhanced access to African markets for American goods and services. It's not something that's going to be written off completely. Will his administration be transactional? I foresee that.
But with his America First approach, how's that, if you put that into the whole AGOA instance here? I mean, Trump has never been one to say, I'm going to be, second fiddle to any country or nation or system. Mm-hmm. So how does that play in now with Africa in view?
You know what? I would say it's really up to our leaders in Africa to work towards a recognition they think we deserve, or we deserve as a continent. A divided house cannot stand. So it's up to the leaders now to go back and say, well, this is what we can bring to the table.
Do you
Without
think
that, we are nowhere. We have no bargaining power.
Now, this is the interesting thing. In some aspects, Trump's rhetorics align with the African culture, especially when it comes to preferences in sexual orientation or expression. Do you think that this will help strengthen any kind of relationship between the African countries and Trump, or the Trump administration?
Repeat the question again, please.
So I'm asking if certain cultural similarities that Trump has with certain African nations, especially when it comes to sexual preference or identification, do you think that these similarities will help cement relationships between America and African nations as he's coming into the presidency?
That's a very tough one, but it is doable. Trump has been very clear on his stance in terms of sexual preferences. We've seen statements stating that transgender males will no longer be allowed to participate in female sports. We've seen that, and it's played across Africa. We've seen what happened in the last Olympics with the boxer. We've also known his stance for the transgender in the military. Now, in terms of coming to Africa, yes, those similarities are there, but then we also have African countries that have also keyed into, I'm looking for a better way to put this across. But we've seen African countries give in to LGBTs and other groups of that sort. So we don't know how it's going to play out, but Trump's stance has been very clear from the onset.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's also talk about China as well. China's influence in Africa is growing when it comes to loans to some East African, also West African countries as well. China is growing, and Trump seemed intent on countering China's influence, not just in Africa, but globally as well. So how might this, shape U.S. engagement with Africa under his administration?
Well, what I foresee is that the U.S. will work towards competing with China in Africa. China has gained influence globally, like you said, not just in Africa, but globally. But we're going to be looking at the China Belt and Road Initiative and where they stand. And the efforts could also prioritize strategic gains over Africa's developmental needs. The U.S. will have to work hard because for China, it's not about not conforming to a particular policy. It's more of, what do you have for me? What can I give you, and what do you need from me, and what can I give? It's a transactional thing with African nations. They're not getting into sexual orientation and things like that. So I would love to see how it plays out with China.
Okay. And let's talk about his conviction now. Joy, the first U.S. president with a record. How is this going to affect credibility when it comes to relationship with African countries? I mean, I don't know how to put this, but I'm going to put it on I'm going to say this is in a jocular fashion. He's no different from most African rulers at this point now, is it?
So he'll feel welcome.
So yeah, exactly. This is good company.
He's in good company.
What do you think?
I'm gonna pretend like I didn't hear the first part of your sentence. Anyway, for the United States, I would say that it could undermine the U.S. credibility in promoting governance and the rule of law, particularly in Africa, where Washington often champions accountability and transparency. Given African leaders will now have more leverage to challenge double standards in international diplomacy. So. It's no longer like, oh, well, this person did this person did that. You're the big brother, and then if you're the big brother and you have this on you, what moral justification do you have to put me in order? So, however, the U.S. influence will still largely depend on its economic and strategic partnership rather than personal legal challenges of a sitting president or any leader.
All right. I mean, let's also talk about, foreign assistance. U.S. has been instrumental when it comes to developmental assistance for Africa. But we also know that Trump he has a history of cutting foreign aid budgets. Do you see this happening for Trump 2.0 and Africa when it comes to our developmental goals?
With Trump, anything can happen. With Trump, stand by. Anything can happen. But I would say that Africa should reduce its dependency on aid by strengthening intra-African trade, leveraging on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and also engaging diverse global partners to fund critical sectors like education and health. We can't just sit down, fold our hands, and expect aid. That lessens your value to the table. And when you have intra-African trade at just 14.4% of total continental trade compared to 59% and 69%, I believe, in Europe. So it's 59% in Asia and 69% in Europe. The implementation of the free trade area agreement becomes very crucial. So it's important that we know what we are offering, and what we are bringing in for.
And figuratively speaking, how tall is Trump's wall going to be? We remember his first term in office, build a wall. Everybody get out, go back to where you're coming from. The nuance around his rhetoric on immigration is rather strong. Now, even Africa, we were agitated by the fact that the restrictions on travel was also placed on most African countries, especially if you're from a certain religion. What are we going to see now as it affects African nations, especially the ones that are Islamic?
Like I did say a moment ago, that with Trump, anything can happen. One has to stand by. I do think that his second term will mirror what happened in, the duration of his 4-year term, and it's not going to be any different. I don't think his sentiments towards African leadership or Africa as a whole has changed. It's up to our leaders now to change the narrative. When you bring value to the table, you cannot be removed.
Yeah, we must say thank you so much, Joy, for taking out the time to join us today. What we hope to see for this administration, incoming administration by Monday, is some level of I don't want to say the word, but I do hope that, Trump is able to, when it comes to bilateral ties and visiting and statements that are made about the African country, especially an African continent, and the countries are made in a way where it is respectful to the people of Africa. But thank you so much for taking out the time to join us today, Joy.
Thank you for having me. Again, it falls on the African Union as well. We must adopt a unified strategy, leveraging platforms like the African Union to negotiate favorable terms for us in terms of trade and security and technology, while emphasizing mutual benefits for us. So we just can't fold our hands. We do have the African Union, so they have to rise up to the occasion.
Absolutely, without a question of a doubt. But we also do not want a president who refers to their countries as African countries as whole.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you very much.